There you go. Let's make sure it shows up on LinkedIn. Give it a minute. We're going here. All right. So it is noon. It is going there. We're live. 18 seconds now. All right, we
Oh
are
yeah,
live.
it just showed me the live too.
Yeah, that's good. The other thing I like about this with LinkedIn is it'll show up in the feed. It'll pop up on people's, if they're on LinkedIn now, it'll show
Yeah.
live right now, and it'll start to pop and everything. So, which is really good. We're recording. All right, so let's go ahead and get started
Yeah.
with the first question, which is one I think is kind of a an
You're
interesting
kicking us off
question.
really in a really loaded way, Randy.
Exactly right. I was like, let's just get
Why
into it
not just
right
go
here.
all in?
Let's just let's get to it. Let's see what people really think about this. And really, and I think it's an important question just because of everything we're seeing on the news today. Poor Bud Light sent one six pack of cans to somebody and their entire thing is, crumbling. Not crumbling, but there's a huge impact for something that they felt was harmless. And I think that's where a lot of us may get in trouble. We don't know what we don't know, right? So if we think about it with diversity and tolerance, we all come from different cultures. How does someone maintain their integrity and professionalism in the workplace? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say I'll start with two thoughts. And one thing you'll all learn really quickly about me is I never have only two thoughts on anything. But I feel that in this situation there's always two sides to everything. And I think on our individual side, we have to know what our stance and our perspectives and integrity looks like for us so that we can carry on in a professional way in alignment with those. But I also think empathy is really important today. And I also will go out and say I feel like we need more of it in all aspects of life, world, career. And if you're able to really understand or put yourself in the shoes as much as you can and empathize with that kind of other side or the counter argument, I think that it gives us the ability to close that gap, and it doesn't become as hard to navigate the diversity, tolerance, in a professional but also very integral way. The office politics piece I think is tricky because it's just so different depending on the situation. And so are we talking politics around diversity? Are we talking politics around, hey, so and so got promoted instead of me? So I feel like that's a little bit different one, but in the big picture, I think you have to know your stance and kind of values around diversity and then apply those in an empathetic way.
Yeah, I think empathy's part of it and listening and tolerance on both sides. If someone has or maybe approaching a topic of politics, especially going into an election year, is that, allow somebody to step out. If all of a sudden I'm having a conversation that I'm not comfortable with, it's like, hey, I don't want to talk about this, and be able to remove yourself from the situation as well as the opposing side or the opposition, allow that person to back out, if we want to call it that way. Have you seen anything in with your clients or in your current with the current job market where this has kind of popped up as something that people are concerned about?
Yeah, and there's concerns kind of across the board. It is diversity, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion in hiring has definitely become very prevalent. And I think that there are positives and negatives to that I have to be really careful how to vocalize without seeming unempathetic and insensitive because I think that there's a really fine line of balance around healthy DEI, and there's some practices out there that I think tip over where we're getting into DEI for DEI's sake and not
Yeah.
DEI hiring practices that still lead to hiring the best candidate. I mean, if I don't want to be hired by somebody because I'm a female career coach. I want to be hired because I am the best career coach and fit for them. And I think that there's some questionable practices around that have non-diverse candidates becoming a little bit frustrated. And it's something to just, I think, be aware of on all sides. And also knowing as a candidate how to speak to your approach to creating an inclusive work environment is becoming very important when you go
Very
into these
interesting.
interviews.
That's very interesting, being able to speak to this topic and that you're able to articulate your position or or your ability to be in this world,
Mhm.
right? And I think one of the other things you mentioned was, someone being concerned about the hiring side of the based on the best person for the job. And do you find that the best candidates, that who are the best candidates, do they really have a concern with this? I mean, if you're the best, you're the best. But if you're like mediocre or average, this is where the DEI could come into play, where
If
you're
you're
like exactly the
mediocre or
same.
average, you need to call me
Right.
because
There
then we'll
we
make
go.
you the top of the stack. I think you bring up a good point because not everybody is top and not everybody's top in everything. You know what
Right.
I mean? Nobody's top across the board. And that's when we get into, I'll go on a small diatribe for a minute, the unicorn job descriptions that we see out there. No
Hmm.
one checks all those boxes. It is a wish list. And whether it's a DEI piece that they can't that is hidden because they can't put that on an application, and it's a requirement that I would never know at application stage, or it's just this laundry list of qualifications that these people want and are never going to find in a single human. We have to be really aware of the fact that nobody checks all those boxes across the top. So we're all a little mediocre in something, and you just need to be aware of what your strengths and your potential gaps are, so that you can speak to all of that and confidently, relay your unique value proposition to who you're interviewing with, regardless of what gender you are, regardless of what skin color you are, regardless of what number of years experience you might even have.
Right. And I think I'm going to jump up to a question that we have coming. That's like our second question, but we just spoke really kind of to something we
Oh,
talked about there, is how does someone identify the most important qualities and traits of a job, right? Just what you spoke to. It's like the hidden unicorn, the hidden nuggets that you need to be aware of, so they can translate their experience to align with the needs of the organization. What does that look like for someone? And I think it's an important, because if there's a big layoff in the tech sector, right? So now someone may be looking to expand into supply chain management, for
mhm.
example. How do I translate my experience in the tech sector to land a position in supply chain, or some example of that? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I'm glad you added some example of that because there isn't a hard and fast rule, and there's a lot of subjectivity around this. But I'll actually give kind of two examples of it. One from an application perspective and one from an interview perspective. So from an application and that kind of front end perspective where you get to actually read a job description, I tend to give more weight to the first 3 or 4 bullets in a job description, assuming that whoever wrote it kind of prioritized it in some logical order from most important down. And what I usually tell people is if you are 70% qualified for a role, it is worth a shot because nobody's expecting to get every checkbox on their list. And if they do, their talent acquisition team is in their ear going, "You're not going to get every single checkbox on this list." So you can kind of prioritize. And here's a great example if we're talking to somebody who is coming out of tech and wants to move into supply chain, for instance. If you're looking at a job description that says 10 plus years of experience in supply chain management or manufacturing, and you don't have that if that's the first bullet, that's like 29% of the 30% play you have, because to me that means with 10 years experience they're looking for somebody who's rooted with the industry, and unless you can cover all the other boxes and not lose your last 1%, that one's going to be a long shot. So summary on the job description evaluation is I give a little bit more weight to the highest level, the higher level bullets, the first few bullets. As far as years of experience, I don't give those a lot of weight until you get to something that says 10 or 15 plus, because that means they want somebody with tenure. Otherwise, I think you have to go down that list and kind of create your own rubric for like, okay, well, I kind of half have this. I kind of half have this. So it's subjective. It's a subjective scoring system. Is there such thing as a subjective scoring system? Because they took that out of the Olympics, right? And then once you get to the interview stage, if you got your foot in the door, which means in my opinion there is a willingness to hire you, you have to go confirm that. And what I usually recommend doing when you're going to go into an interview and you're doing your early prep is you take stock of who you're interviewing with, but then you go through that job description bullet by bullet and have a response to every single thing in case they ask you a question about it, even if it's bullet number 17. That way you're not caught off guard around a question that you have a gap, but you didn't prepare how to speak to it. And that way, if bullet 17 ends up becoming super important to the interviewer, and we didn't think that because it was number 17, you're still prepared to speak to it.
Yeah, when you mentioned that was one was the benefits of working with a coach like yourself or someone who can take me out of my own head. I would read a job description and I would say this is really important or I think that's
Mhm.
important when in reality that may not be,
Yep.
right? As well as, that opportunity, I think if you get in there, say you're the tech guy trying to get into the supply chain world and that you do get that interview. I think, and this is Randy's opinion and asking, career expert like yourself, is this when they're really looking at the person's thought process and ability to do the job versus qualifying on a resume with checks in the box? Is that what they're looking for?
That I kind of share that perspective. And side note, statistically speaking, women are terrible at what I'm saying. Men will apply for a job they're 50% qualified for. Women hold themselves to 100% standard, and you have your whole unicorn thing. So there's your proof against the
Mhm.
concept, ladies. When you get in, and so in my opinion, I actually did a poll on this on LinkedIn maybe a month ago about you know potentially unpopular opinion. If they'll interview, they'll hire. If they'll interview you, they'll hire you. And actually, a lot of people agreed with me with some exceptions, like it's not a real role, it's fake because they have an internal candidate, or there's a DEI component in play. Okay. So outside of some, let's say, political, bureaucratic, or corporate policies going on, once they've seen the resume, they generally feel you have got the qualifications and ability to do the role. The interview is really about assessing your fit, in my opinion. And I attest that a hiring manager will select somebody who is a 90% culture fit and a 70% qualification fit before they hire the opposite. Fit
Okay.
trumps to some extent qualifications as long as those qualifications give you the core ability to do the job.
So they're looking just for, like I said, a good fit. And some of the things I've read is, there's a younger generation now that there's where ageism is starting to get the reverse perception, where they because they're younger,
Yep.
employers are concerned about them versus older. For those on the line who may be older, saying you may have an opportunity to expand your career because you have work ethic, the ability to show up, experience, leadership, all these things that a younger person may not have, and
Mhm.
vice versa. A younger person who can uh, just demonstrate those traits, leadership, experience, patience, showing up to work. We make a joke about it, but that's some of the things they have to think about and show that in the interview process, which kind of talks to out another question we talked about. Well, what's that career advice we wish we had early in our career that we never got? What were some of the things you think about when you hear
All
that
right.
question?
So I'm going to give you my answer to this question, then I'm going to give you the answer to the question that I think people who are early in their career need to hear. One, LinkedIn is your career best friend. So, a fun fact, I graduated from college 12 days after LinkedIn came on the scene. And what's interesting is I remember having a profile really early on and kind of adopting it, but like that whole social networking idea was in infancy in the early 2000s. And now I really wish career services at universities was better about encouraging LinkedIn presence very early on in your career, because if you build a network of people, whether you know them in person or virtually, you will almost never need to submit an online application for a job. So the power of networking is, especially if adopted early in your career, becomes exponential. And I think that that's a really really valuable lesson that I kind of wish I had known. One of the things I think that people in their early career now need to hear is your first job out of college isn't going to be the sexiest thing you ever do. And I think you alluded to it, Randy, that there's a little bit of like reality versus expectations when kids come out of college. I'm going to say kids, that ages me, but hey. When kids come out of college thinking they're going to be 2, 3 rungs up the ladder than realistically they can be. The number of times I talk to a new grad and they're like, well, I want to be a manager. And I'm like, well, what are you going to manage? You don't have foundational domain experience to manage anything. So you just have to get started. Your first career out of school isn't going to be super sexy. Maybe it will be Prove me wrong. However, you just have to get started, and where you begin likely won't be where you end, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think a lot of that perfectionism comes into play because there's like so much comparison. But as an early career professional, get started, learn what your skills and strengths are, learn what your interests are, because when you're 18 choosing a degree, there's a good chance it isn't what you're going to do forever. Civil engineer who's now a career coach, right? And so I would say relieve or alleviate some of that pressure you put on yourself to make this really perfect right move, and take an opportunity as it comes and see what you learn from that and see where that takes you.
So, a couple things, we see it. What is the unspoken rules of networking? You mentioned that right off the bat,
Mm,
and I think with social media being a way, and I've talked about this with some other career advisors and coaches as well, is like, social media is kind of a thing where you can be active but not productive. And you may feel that you're
ooh,
doing all this stuff on LinkedIn and you're posting, but you're not getting the results you want. And so, but what these unspoken rules of networking, and with COVID pushing people inside and trying to get people back out, we're a people business, we socialize, and people
mhm,
need to get to know you. So what are the unspoken rules of networking? Not the stuff that everyone talks about, but really the unspoken world
mhm.
rules of networking that most people don't do that they should.
Well, I think you bring up a good kind of lead into this, is that we have the perception of hyper connectedness, yet as a society we're more disconnected than ever,
Mm.
which to me means that the golden rule of networking is to be authentic and follow the golden rule. Treat people the way you would want to be treated. So the best example I ever gave of this is I was trying to help a young professional learn how to network, and basically the door was being opened, or the intro note was like basically straight into, "Hey, I'm interested in a job. Can you help me?" And the best uh anecdote I could give was, do you go on a first date and at the end pop out a ring? No, you don't. You don't even I mean, you don't even know if you want to pop a ring at that point, but you are going to freak out the other side because you've gone too hard and too fast. So build like approach it as a relationship building opportunity, and do so in authenticity to who you are, how you would really communicate. Don't use the LinkedIn generated AI message that pops up if you want to message somebody who posted a job, because 30 other people have done that, which means it's not going to stand out. And it also doesn't sound like a human, right? AI is a trap sometimes. So be a human. I have a hashtag that I'm trying to get some steam around here on LinkedIn that's hashtag humans still matter. So be a human, talking to humans, building relationships, and being authentic about how you approach networking. To me, that's the foundation of how you do it well, and how it also doesn't feel icky. Because if you approach it in an inauthentic, I need to get something out of you way, you're going to be turned off up by it because it also doesn't feel good. So be authentic.
I'm putting up your banner for so we can have it go here, right there. Hashtag
Yeah.
humans still matter. Is that it? Is that the one we want?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I agree. And AI, they're starting to find out. We had a conversation about AI, and it's starting to bubble up. But you have to be an expert in what you're doing.
Yeah.
You really have to be an expert in what you're doing to be able to know if the AI is working correctly. And they've shown
Yeah.
this several times in all these AI examples that they're putting out there to kind of trick the system. But you're not tricked if you don't know better, right? That's just the way it is,
Yep.
because the AI says so. So the time of the expert or the top performers is not over. In that fact, it's the opportunity for these folks that really know what they're doing to work with AI to exponentially reproduce themselves, using AI
Absolutely.
as a way to do that.
And AI
And
is a whole rabbit hole that we could go down, but I will close us out and we'll move on to a new topic, in that it's you still have to direct it. It still has to have
mhm,
human input in order to give you correct output. Perfect examples. I was writing my monthly newsletter this morning that's going out this afternoon, and I send a monthly newsletter about the state of the career economy. I love digging into those like labor statistics and all that kind of stuff. And I was writing it and I was like, out of curiosity, I was like, I wonder what Chat GPT would do if I asked it to write my newsletter. And I put in the links for like, could you summarize this report? Could you summarize this report? and it says, well, the economy created 990,000 jobs this past month in October. If you're listening to the recording, FYI, it's May, and we did not create 990,000 jobs this month or in October or kind of ever. Because if that happens, inflation's never coming into control. So again, you have to be careful. And as a friend of mine says, you have to babysit it. It's an enablement tool.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's an enablement and a multiplier if used correctly,
Yep.
but it have to definitely be used correctly. And speaking of mistakes, what are the most critical mistakes people are making during their job search? Then how can
And
they avoid them?
here's a soapbox slash broken record. The number one mistake in job searching is lack of clarity. Lack of clarity in a job
Yep.
search is more detrimental than a bad resume. And that is more true now than it's ever been, even though it has always been very, very true. Right. And the reason is if you have lack of clarity, you probably have a bad resume. And I don't mean that the resume is bad. I mean that it won't perform and won't resonate because you haven't focused it towards the audience that you want to reach and the type of job that you're trying to position yourself for.
When you say clarity, what exactly does that mean? When someone say lack of clarity, what does that mean to somebody?
It can mean a couple different things. At the very core, it is know exactly the types of roles that you are looking for and
Mhm.
hyper tailor your materials to it. Then from there, you can add layers of focus. If you also know where and what industry you want to perform those roles in, then you can even tailor a more market driven resume. For instance, if you're that tech person who worked at, Amazon's technology for their e-commerce store and you can translate into supply chain working for a physical product, translate that knowledge and speak to the value proposition that experience in tech brings to the supply chain market. While also saying this is how I can operate in your environment as a functional role. So the more layers of clarity you can add, the easier it becomes to evaluate those job descriptions whenever you're looking at them. The easier it becomes to network because you understand what you're trying to do and who a good networking contact is. And I would say the third piece of that triangle is also understanding your own values so that now you're looking for employers who align with those.
And I've spoken to this several times, is that you have to be the CEO of your own career. And just like any CEO of any business, clarity is key to finding the correct
Mhm.
customers that want to buy from you.
Yeah.
And a job search, any person today must manage their career just like a business. From clarity, mission, vision, where do you want to go? Plan your next 20, 30 years. Because if you've been at a job for 3 years and you're expecting a promotion and it's not coming, is that part of your career plan, or are you just frustrated? Do you, like you said, do you
Mhm.
know what you're asking for? What's your clarity? And that
Yep.
clarity also helps your current company know whether or not to keep you. Are you part of the future, or are you just part of
Yep.
the many involved here? What's a different or another critical mistake you're seeing besides lack of clarity?
I would say leaning too heavily on online job boards. There's validity to them. It's a worthwhile exercise. However, we know the numbers. 85% of jobs are filled through networking, recruitment, or not online job boards, yet candidates put 85% of their time into them. So if you've ever heard of Pareto's principle, the 80/20 rule, you got it exactly backwards. I think that online job boards are good for I mean I've had people get positions from them. However, currently they're in 2021 and early 22, you could apply to 50 jobs online and feel pretty confident you would get a call just because of the nature of the market. But that was a very uncommon situation due to that kind of hiring tear that now put big tech in the situation that it's in, for instance. And we kind of got spoiled by that and forgot how important it is to diversify our tactics. So if you're like trigger happy on the apply button, expect for your job search to take a while. You might submit 100 applications before you get a call back, even if you have a professionally written optimized resume. So as a misstep, be cautious of leaning too much or prioritizing too much online applications versus kind of networking, having a hit list that you can prospect and attempting to bring humans into your search.
And one expectation I feel that people have kind of started to adopt or expect is something called this life balance. And what does that mean for people? What's a realistic expectation when it comes to life balance? That critical mistake you're talking about, hyper focused resume, networking appropriately to make sure you're getting there. But then you start to talk, and your people expect to work from remotely, so they're on a lawn chair on the beach.
Yeah.
Is that realistic? And how do people kind of temper their expectations?
I'm withholding my compulsion to go on a Tim Ferriss rant right now because I'm pretty sure if you asked him, he would retitle the book for our work week. Also, I'm not going to crap all over young people, but this is where a lot of this is coming from, the quiet quitting movement and a lot of things that are basically that, again, reality versus expectation or perception, that I can have a really easy job and make $150,000 a year. And maybe that's just because I come from I'm a young Gen X where that's not what happens. And at some point you have to do some work to lay a foundation to allow yourself those flexibilities and freedoms. Same would go even if you're in business and an entrepreneur. You got to
Mhm.
build the foundation. You got to do the work to reap the rewards. So can we just say reality check might be one good thing? But I have a better answer, or I have an extended answer. I think we need to take that kitschy term work-life balance and turn it and turn it into values alignment. So I have a podcast, shameless plug, called No More Mondays. And we talk to people who have actually figured out how to find satisfying work, whether it's as an employee or as an entrepreneur. And one of the things that has consistently come out through that conversation is that people find values aligned employers to work with, and it immediately creates a solid foundation for higher satisfaction and better balance because you've done that due diligence and you're equally yoked going in. So if one of your values is time with my family, don't go work for a 15-person tech startup. But you need to know that going in. There we go back to the clarity piece. But you have to know that that's a core value of yours going in so that you can assess when you're interviewing whether there is that culture fit.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, you got to know what you want. You got to be prepared to articulate that, because knowing a startup, I mean, both of us have started businesses where we are now. I mean, there are no Mondays when it comes to business. You're working 24/7. Of
And that's a
course we
good thing and a
relax,
bad thing at the same time.
but you,
There are
you
no
eat what you
Mondays, but
kill,
there's
right?
no Mondays.
Right? That means you don't get a weekend, right? It's like, well, maybe everything should be a Friday. Well, we can make that, but you build that foundation that allows you to have that thing. And I think Mark Cuban says, I can't, he can't articulate enough how many 10 years companies were overnight successes. The point being that overnight just happened based on 10 years of work that they finally got to
Yes.
that point.
Yeah.
And that's even for someone in their career. If they have a career track, if they're managing their career instead of being an employee,
Mm-hmm.
they're being a career manager. They're working their way up to that position where they're going, and
And
they
I
can
think
get there.
we have an active role in this as well. So one is to seek out that alignment and the values that you have and prioritize showing up in a company insofar as you can assess. But I also think we as individuals, especially as we grow in our careers, have a role to play when it comes to setting boundaries, realistic expectations, and I would even say like being cautious of that perfectionism that can come in where you are creating the work and this level of standard for yourself that is perpetuating the imbalance within yourself. And you want to blame it on your environment, right? Oh my gosh, I have so much work to
Right.
do. Well, how much of that are you creating for yourself out of some sort of perfectionism or a standard that you're just never going to meet? And it's not that you half-ass things, but there is, again, the 80/20 rule in some respects, but also create healthy habits for yourself so that you can operate within your environment in a balanced, aligned way.
And whatever balance is for you, right? There's some people who maybe you're single, you don't have a family yet, so your balance is different than someone
Mhm.
who's starting to have a family and starting to grow, kids and
Exactly.
time, or they're just further along in their career. uh, you know they're on the back side of their career, and
Mhm.
they've decided they've made those decisions and they've made those mistakes. Another reason to
Yep.
work with a career coach is they help you avoid mistakes. Is you keep working,
Mhm.
but you got to have that long term focus. You
Well,
got
and
to
I'm
have that
actually
long
going to
term
jump in and I'll add one more thing that connects this to the previous topic, which is what I wish I knew or what I wish young people knew. And also the balance is define what you want out of your career for yourself and know what your definition of career growth is. Because traditionally, corporate America defines growth as climb a ladder, take on more responsibility, make more money. But there are other ways to grow in your career than that. And I think that in some areas, corporate America is starting to notice that and create other
Mhm.
ways to engage, diversify, and grow. And if you're able to define what growth looks like, I think it's a little easier to find that balance and find that alignment as far as the role and function goes. Because why, if you don't want to be in a high pressure situation where you're managing, a $5 million budget and a team of 15 people, you don't have to. However,
Right.
you can easily kind of get plopped there if you're not careful and you haven't defined the fact that you would rather grow through subject matter knowledge and thought leadership, for instance. So I would say that's another like answer to something I wish I knew, but also a way to be realistic about expectations is being honest with yourself.
And there are consequences to those decisions, right? The one where you got 15 people, $5
Mhm.
million budget, you're going to have a certain salary expectation, a certain work expectation versus thought leadership and building a brand for yourself is going to have a different result, which may be less salary and you're not as busy, but that's a decision you make with the consequences
Yes.
of those decisions.
Yep. We all
And
have choice. And
exactly, yeah,
and a really good way to make sure you're making sound choices is to have a little roadmap for yourself and know what's important to you and where you generally want to go while not being so tunnel visioned you can't turn left and take a cool opportunity if a door opens. But you generally have to have a compass point.
absolutely. Got to know where you're going. You
Hmm.
can't be lost. You're not lost if you don't know where you're going,
Yep.
right? And part of doing that, it talks to the next question was, how is a person to understand what's going on in the trend? How they stay up to date with trends and in technology, AI being a good example. Supply chain used to be in the back room. Now it's very much at the forefront of a lot of conversations. How does someone stay up and really, stay competitive as they have a changing market?
Mm. I have a lot of little thoughts around this, and also a lot of them are resources. So, first of all, if you don't want to stay informed around your industry or where you're working, you might want to make a change because if you're not that engaged in it to want to understand what's happening and how it's evolving, it probably means it's not quite interesting enough to you. So that would be kind of one thing to just again be honest with yourself around. Outside of that, I think that uh reading articles from thought leaders of varying types, styles, demographics, experiences is really great. LinkedIn is a good place to do that. If you don't already, follow hashtags for your industry, for your roles, to populate more diverse information in your news feed that you can read. And I also think following trusted but diverse news sources can be a good way to understand what's just happening in the greater market and kind of like overall world when it comes to different trends and technologies. And then there's that idea of continually working to skill build. And this doesn't mean you have to go get another degree. I'm not a huge fan of the go back to school because it rarely has an ROI. But
Right.
there are tons of skill building and alternative education things out there, from boot camps, which have a little higher commitment, to Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, different certifications that can boost your marketability and keep you up on trends. And if you're like making a career industry shift, help you learn the jargon of a different industry. So there's lots of different outcomes those can that can provide. But to go back to an earlier point, you've got to have the clarity of how you want to grow in your career and what you want to do and what roles you want to focus on and what industries you want to be in order to align those resources and the trends research and the skill building that you do to those goals for overall marketability.
Yeah, Couple things. One, diverse sources. With all the information out there, one of the things we do when we're doing research papers is we try to find multiple sources so we can find multiple sources. And I like to call it triangulation of three sources. You have a government source, a private source, and
Mhm.
an industry source
Yep.
to kind of see what the trend is. And eventually they'll all align, but in the beginning, they'll kind of all have different viewpoints on a specific topic. The economy is a great example. What the government's saying versus what industry is saying versus what the private sector is saying. And each industry is different. They'll see and they'll talk about it differently. And another point I think you brought up was great was education versus certification.
Ooh.
And
Mm.
certification shows special skills, such as the certified professional supply management, something we can
Yep.
help someone with, is very specific for supply management. Where education, minimum education, like a high school diploma, bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctorate, shows a level of critical thinking and it brings more thought into something, versus a special skill. So with a bachelor's degree
Mhm.
in supply chain management, you need a certification in supply chain management because you have that specific skills, or a degree in supply chain management. How do you feel about that when you're working with clients and you find they may not have the skills for a specific job? Do you recommend a certification so they get the skills? Or do you see this more of a career path? You got to kind of know where you're headed and you got to constantly build your skills.
Well, and that's where you have to know what skills to build and what kind of return
Right.
on investment that time and energy will take. I I'm a big fan, assuming you have like base minimum education that a career track or a even individual job is seeking. From there, I think building skills that fill holes as far as what those jobs are looking for can go a long way and maybe even further than more critical thinking education. And a lot of times it's way cheaper and faster, which is
Right.
why I like it has to be a really specific situation for me to say, okay, I think it makes sense to go back and get a second degree or to go back and get a higher level degree, simply because by the time a lot of people come across those instances, they're mid, they're in their 30s, 40s, and they're at the point where half their career is gone. It's like, how long is it going to take you? And you also have to consider your relevant experience, because skill building, education, certifications, whatever it is, are only so good if they're completely disconnected from something that you've done professionally. So there's a whole little matrix and equation there that is not necessarily always balanced.
Well, and education is a business, right? So they're marketing education. They can definitely pull our
Mhm.
strings to make us see the value of education. But I feel that you bring up a very, very good point in that, it's like the so what question. So what if I get an MBA? How's that going to help me? The ROI. And the ROI is not even the money, in my opinion. It's
Yep.
the
It's
time that you
time.
spend. Yeah. You can't get that
Yeah.
time back,
Well, and
you know?
there's several variables there. Time and investment, but you also have to think about the counter financial implication of like a full-time MBA, for instance,
Right.
right? Not only are you spending 2 years in an MBA, that's most likely 2 years you're not making 2 to $300,000, and if it's a $100,000 program, you just made a 2 to $400,000 swing. How
Mhm.
long is it going to take you to earn back that money once you have an MBA? And is there an alternative path to doing that that keeps you on positive cash flow versus negative? So, for instance, 2 years in an MBA, and then you come out, and you're still going to have to probably go up the ladder a little bit to get to that ROI income, versus don't do the MBA, go do an interim step of a job or a role or a level for 2 years. You just landed at the exact same place you would have without spending the money and the time.
Right. And you have that life balance we talked about a little
Yeah,
bit
and then you're
earlier.
also not, yeah, you're not killing yourself in an MBA program. Also, I can really get on a soapbox about MBAs, because people my age who were
Right.
early career when the Great Recession hit in '08 flocked to MBA programs in some way, shape, and form. That degree has been a little bit diluted unless you go
Right.
to a very high level program aligned with the companies you want to work with, right? So if you want to go be a
Right.
Fortune 500 executive, you go to an MBA program where those companies recruit from. Now you're going to get your return on investment. Outside of that specific instance, I tend to argue and and get creative on finding alternative pathways that get you to the same goal with just less skin in the game.
I think you nailed it there. It's where the companies you want to work for go
Mhm.
to find the people they want to hire.
Yep.
Be it with we talk certification. People say, well, do I need a supply chain certification? My response is, I don't know. What company do you want to work for?
Yep.
Do they value that supply chain
Mhm.
certification, or do they have their own internal
Yep.
training that
And
they
what
want you to
relevant
go through?
experience to supply chain do you already have that could negate the need for that or that
Yeah.
could enhance it?
And can you articulate that, right? And that's working
Mhm.
with a career coach allows you to have that opportunity. So we got about 20 minutes to go, and the next
Okay,
three
cool.
questions are what I call the fun ones.
Oh, okay. I'm already having fun, so let's go.
But well, this one's where this is where those
Oh,
watching as well, feel free to start typing in the chat box and ask questions as well, because this is where we want to kind of start to think outside the box because we're going into a new economy. Whether you think we're
totally.
in a recession or not, things are changing with AI, the economy, inflation, dollar, deal, all these different things. Things are changing. So, what disruptive technologies or trends do you think will have the biggest impact on the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years? I think 5 to 10 years is important because if you're
Yes.
managing your career, you have to think 10 years out. Where do I
Yep.
want to be in 10 years? And how should people plan to adapt and prepare for those changes?
I love when I get to use my crystal ball. Let me say something to you. Your lead into this made me think of something that I actually think we are literally in the disruption right now at this current moment in time. And a lot of it has been triggered by the tech layoffs, right? So the way I phrase this is we have seen layoffs at big tech, not necessarily big tech layoffs, but a lot of this has been brought on by a 15-year growth and hiring tear that they just went all in on for the last 3 years, and now they're having to reconcile. But I feel that it's a little bit of the straw that broke the camel's back, and what we're now seeing is this active transition into a new norm. And while this has been largely impacting tech is such a significant and disruptor of industry that it gives us indicators of what's going to happen across the board. And I think in the next couple months I think that we're coming down the bell curve and the dust is settling. And in the next couple months, we'll kind of know what the long term nature of the tech industry looks like because we're just used to it being boom. It isn't really bust right now. However, it's just going to have a new norm that is going to be uncomfortable for people in tech for a little bit because we're used to the hiring tear. But they're just going to see exactly what supply chain sees, exactly what healthcare sees, which is just normal activity. And as far as like what I think is so I think that that's an important foundation because I think that's happening right now, which is so interesting when you consider the fact that we've got ChatGPT coming in, Bard coming in. We already had ATS disrupting and making hiring processes very non-human, if you ask me. And I think that we're just going to see all of that amplify. Um, I think that the AI specifically around Chat GPT is going to start becoming more refined. And while it'll still need to be individually directed, I think we're going to see its capabilities grow. And then I think we're going to start seeing that trickling into, don't be scared by this, but where I see some of this going, especially in 10 years, is we're going to start seeing job displacement. And that doesn't mean job replacement, that means displacement, where somebody who maybe physically worked on a manufacturing line is now replaced by some sort of AI or robotics. That human can't do the job created by the AI or the robotics. So we have a displacement in the workforce. And all of that is also going to be really interesting in the timing of baby boomers retiring, the influx of Gen Z. It's just the next like year or two is a really interesting perfect storm of factors that are across the board: economic, technologic, socio. I mean, it's interesting. So, as far as like disruptions go, I don't know if I have specific ones, but I would say that's my like bigger picture of what how I see this little orb we're dealing with right now unfolding, and where some technological elements we're seeing emerging now are probably going to become more substantial.
Well, you had a lot of very good thoughts, and I agree. Disruption, displacement versus replacement. But you have a younger crowd, or even mid career people. The baby boomers are going to retire, and they're going to move on. Maybe. But how does somebody really prepare for this
Mm,
disruption? What is there? And I would say it needs to be a thought process a system of thinking that will keep them current
Mhm.
and relevant in whatever industry they choose to be in and the life balance that they want to get. So how does somebody
Yeah.
prepare for this?
I think this goes back to the trends discussion in some regard of keeping a finger on the pulse of what's going on in your little world is going to become important, and what you need to do to stay at or ahead of the curve. And so complacency is not going to be an option because things are going to be moving at an even like more rapid pace as this AI and technology stuff just generates more and more disruptors. I hate that word, but it's the best application. I mean, it's the best thing
Mhm.
to call this. And so, always learning. I think that it's interesting that earlier we were talking about like the ageism sandwich, right? So if
Right?
you're like 35 to 50, you're like in the happy meat, but if you're younger or older than that, you're like the bread. And I think that that's where it's important to show that you can constantly adapt to technologies and have to find the balance between staying somewhere too long where you'll have the perception of complacency and lack of learning versus hopping too much so that you can't actually learn and gain additional knowledge for the next application. So again, I think it comes back to like road mapping and planning and knowing in general where you want to go so that you can stay in tune with the trends around that ecosystem, and always be gaining new skills, whether it's in your job or through extracurriculars or professional development.
Yeah, and one thing I would add with that is, that goes back to networking, which we talked about earlier. Talking to people, being at the right events,
Yes.
being in the right circles, seeing the trend, not being complacent. I think that's a huge, a set of advice for anyone. Don't be complacent. Don't be the
Hmm.
the rabbit that falls asleep and the tortoise just passes them by.
Yep.
Always be out there learning, making a difference.
Balance
Uh,
doesn't mean do nothing, which is also
correct.
why I will go on the diatribe for 30 seconds. I think you have to be really careful of quiet quitting. If you are in
Mhm.
a situation where you're quiet quitting, it's time to find a new job. Because
Right.
quiet quitting basically means you're disengaged and you're becoming complacent and you're not going to grow in that opportunity. And that's not fair to you, nor is it fair to the employer who you are being paid to do a job for. And so I think that you have to be really, really aware of that. And it goes back to that balance. The balance kind of, even though balance technically is a level set, it kind of almost works both ways and has pressure and factors from two different sides that we all need to be cognizant of.
If you're not in the race, you're not in the competition.
Nope.
And when that word comes from the top, they say, "Hey, we don't have the money. 10% must go." You, the manager, decide which 10% goes. You
Mhm.
balance your budget. You got to reduce your labor budget by 10%. How are you going to do it? And if you're not competitive, you're not even a
Yeah.
conversation. If you're working at home, they never see you, then you okay, well, I don't know who Randy is. He can go, right? I don't see how he adds value, even though you may be the most critical person in the entire operation. They
Mhm.
don't know it.
Yeah.
So networking, socialization, talking to people is
The
key.
informational interview is huge. That was one we should have brought up in the trend with how do you keep up on industry trends.
Mhm.
This is why networking can be so effective. Because if you're always networking, even if it's just a little bit at a time, not only are you building a good foundation to support a job search if and when you need it, but you're also constantly talking to people who are doing your work in other environments, talking to people the next level up, and understanding what skills you need to get there. So there's a lot to be said for how valuable networking is. And there's a reason that I think it's one of those hidden secrets that I wish I would have been told when I was 24.
I was like, that was it right there. You hit it. Can you share unconventional, out of the box career advice that worked for you or someone you know? And I've heard
Mm.
informational interview before. And what is it, and how does somebody get it done? Meaning, how do if I kind of know what I think it is, but from a career expert like yourself, what is an information interview? And if I need one or should have one, how do I do
Well, and what I think is interesting is the informational interviews used to be unconventional, but they're becoming more conventional. And it's something that is this is in a way kind of why we network is to have informational interviews that can either help you get knowledge, help you get your foot in the door, or gain access to more rings on that bullseye as far as like the people in the network that you have. But at its core, and this is how and why that relationship building and authentic approach to networking is so important. because you need to go into an informational interview with integrity to the fact that you've asked somebody for information and not said, hey, can you give me a referral, which can be one of the outcomes. But an informational interview is a two-way street, just like a regular interview is, and like all conversations in relationship building should be, which is, hey, I said I'd love to get a little bit of insight into your experience at X company. What do you like about it? What do you do every day? What kind of skills do you feel like were really critical to you getting here? What career path landed you here? What advice do you have for me as somebody wanting to get into this? Right? So you start out with getting to know them and doing justice to the fact that you said, hey, I'd love to have a chat about your experience with you. Before then, it'll naturally flip to you and you'll get to tell kind of your side of the story. And over time, multiple of those conversations build a really, really good foundation, and you'll have the ability to learn from these people. So if you're like a career changer or an industry shifter, informational interviews can be hugely impactful to helping you get a little bit closer to what a different industry or career might look like, because you can't necessarily visualize that from a job description, but if you hear somebody talk about what they do, it's good information. So quite simply, informational interviews are the foundation of relationship building and networking.
And if I want to do one, so I've
Mhm.
taken Angie's advice. I've built out a roadmap of my career, and I'm at the 3-year mark at my current position. I know my next position is to be a director or a manager. What should be my strategy in regards to informational interviews? Because I'm at a 3-year mark, so I don't expect to move for probably 2 years.
Mhm.
How do I use this strategy to help make sure that when I hit that 5-year mark or 2 years from now, I'm flowing right into that position, my next
Yep.
my next career roadmap, I'm going right past that. How does that work? What should I
Uh,
do?
LinkedIn is a great tool for this. So lean on LinkedIn and or a human network to get tapped into people who are in that place you want to be in 5 years, whether that's the role or the company. Using alumni networks is one of the best ways to start with this,
Okay.
because especially on LinkedIn, a lot of people don't think about the fact that LinkedIn is a database. And while your alma mater probably gives you an alumni database, it is not nearly as robust, nor has the query tools that LinkedIn can provide you. So you can actually connect the two to find alumni at your school who are playing in that ballpark you want to be in. And even if they're 10 years, they still went through that path, and you can leverage their knowledge. And so using LinkedIn as a database to find people who are playing in the space you want to be in, and using it for outreach to say, hey, I'd love to chat with you. I'm planning the next step of my career in the next 2 or 3 years, gathering intel. And alumni specifically tend to want to support each other. And so it's a warm start to this whole process of informational interviewing. And if I'm working with somebody who's uncomfortable networking, that's where we start, because there's an air of familiarity that tends to increase the rate of acceptance and increase the rate of a response if you reach out and say, hey, I'd love to chat with you. We're fellow tartans. To my college
Right.
alumni. My college alumni, or my college mascot, is a type of plaid.
I was gonna ask, what is a tartan?
Yeah.
Okay. So getting into the how, just simply send them a LinkedIn message. I'm at this point. I want to do X.
Mhm.
You have done X. I want to learn more about you. And it's
And
a
make
simple
it
count.
3 sentences that are no bigger than the window that pops up on your LinkedIn screen. Because if you got to
Right.
scroll, I'm gonna think you're spamming me.
Exactly. Yeah,
Practical. There's a
exactly.
practical piece of advice.
There we go. So we got about a few minutes left, and
Okay, cool.
last question is, what's the current state of the job market in the eyes of your clients? What are they experiencing?
Mm.
How are you helping them? What does that look like?
I'm so glad I just wrote my newsletter, because now I'm just going to tell you what it says. No, I'm kidding. I think job seekers, so there's two sides to this. There's like, what are people asking and saying to me, and then like, how am I supporting them through that? Up until about 2 or 3 weeks, things shifted in a positive way 2 or 3 weeks ago. Um, January, February, March of this year were really tough because we didn't see that new year hiring cycle we typically do. It kind of failed to launch because of those, layoffs at those big tech companies. Everybody kind of got a little bit hesitant. It turned in a good way in the last few weeks. So people are definitely, I would say, a little bit frustrated with the length of time job searchers are taking, the amount of activity they have to do in order to get output. the length of time the processes were taking and the length of time between communication, there's higher levels of ghosting, right? So uh, this hiring climate is very different to a year ago, and we got spoiled and have to just put ourselves in check because the current market is very similar to before days. Even statistically speaking, it's actually a little bit better. But 17, 18, 19 looked a whole lot like what we're seeing now. So in effect, it's a perfectly fine market. We weren't like doomsday back then, but it's just because we've got used to those heydays for a year and a half that things are a little bit different, and that's frustrating. People who maybe have been job searching for a while or who job searched in 21 and are now back on the market, they're like, "Whoa, this is different." And so I would say that there's some frustrations around just how things have changed in that regard. So what I've been telling them is, one, you got to be patient and know this just isn't the feast that it was. And as part of that, you've got to be really strategic and methodical in your activity. So you can't have a singular approach to like only job boards. I also don't necessarily support a singular approach and only networking, by the way, either. I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
diversify and try to do a little bit of all the things. But you've got to do that in a really like methodical, consistent way. And using humans is a much better way to be less frustrated and kind of get things done quicker than if you're just trigger happy on the apply button. And so I would say there is a perception that things are really, really bad, and that's not the case. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen a lot of movement. I think I've had more clients get jobs in the last 3 weeks than like March and April combined. So there was a little bit of like a surge of activity, things moved up. So we're moving in a good direction. And if you are kind of doing all the things, you've got a good sound strategy in your methodical and routine with it, you will be able to take advantage of things as they continue to positively shift.
It sounds so time. It takes more time than it did a few years ago. Communication is key, and then having a strategy.
Yes.
And having a strategy is a great opportunity to work with Angie. So, Angie, what I'm gonna do is pull up your contact slide first. If
Oh,
you can just
okay.
let people know how to best work with you or find you and connect with you, and then after that, we'll talk about your offer for folks so they can learn more about how to develop a strategy. So, what's the best way for people to contact you? I'm gonna pull up your slide real
I'm
quick.
on LinkedIn all the time, so I would love for you to connect with me here. I apologize in advance. I will fill up your Randy and I will fill up your newsfeed. So I try to give a lot of just, I would say, free insight and advice here too. So feel free to follow me here. If you feel like you need a little bit more nuanced and personalized support, you are more than welcome to email me. You can book a free strategy session through the website. So I'm kind of in all the places. Reach out however it is convenient for you. And I'm here to support.
Great. And then we also talked about a course that you have to
Yeah.
help people move forward. I'll bring that up. And as I bring that up, what's the value of this course? What are the benefits they're going to get from it, and how's it going to help them?
If you're sitting out there thinking, man, this has been a bunch of great stuff Randy and Angie's talked about, but I have no clue how to implement any of this, that's the kind of value that a course like this brings, or even coaching in general brings. So our playbook, job search playbook, is exactly that. It's kind of your ultimate guide on how to navigate this job market. And pretty much what we did was take our one-on-one coaching practice, because I am known for one-on-one boutique coaching. It's what I do really well. What we did was take all of the stuff that I say to people all the time, right? 80% of what I say all day is the same from client to client. And we curated it into a self-paced course that gives you all of those resources, implementation strategies. There's even resume templates in here. It's all the tools and resources you need to go navigate the current market and do it strategically and methodically and in a routine way. And it's perfect if you're sitting out there and you're like, man, I'd love to do coaching, but I just can't afford a one-on-one. This is that same type of resources that you can apply to yourself, over time, and you'll have lifetime access to it.
And that's definitely what I think folks need to understand is all of this takes time. A career strategy, any strategy takes time. Just think of the difference between a checkers game and a chess game.
Yes.
For those that play chess and checkers, chess takes, 5, 10, 15 minutes. Unless you're playing, a 6-year-old, then it takes an hour. But, but then a chess game takes a lot longer. You have to think through it. You have to
Hmm.
plan your steps, and it takes time. And having a chess coach or a career coach helps you learn the best strategies faster, then playing hours and hours and hours of chess and still not moving past the next level.
That's a good
So this,
comparison. I never thought about the chess thing. I like it. But that's exactly
yeah,
it.
feel
And we're
free to
doing a
use it.
discount on that, by the way. So for the next week, so through May 18th, that course is going to be $100 off for anybody who goes and grabs it. And again, you have lifetime access. So
And you can't have enough education in this stuff. If when someone joins this course, how long would it take them to get through it?
if you're not working and you just attacked it full, it's all modularized. Is that a word? It's all
It is
it's all
today.
module based.
It is
And
right
so you
now. I
can
mean, so
actually kind of do it in real time. So the first few modules are all on setting your strategy and career search resources and how to define what you want to do, even if you're making a career change. You can work through that in a week or two, even if you're job searching. And then at that point, you're ready to kind of dive into the resume, which might take several hours since it's not something you do all the time. But by module 3, you're ready to go deploy the strategy. Then it's like, okay, I'm going to add networking. Let me dig into that module. Okay, now I'm starting to get interviews. Let me get into all the interview modules. Okay, now I have an
okay.
offer. Let me go to the negotiations module. So you can kind of pace it out to align with the milestones that you're experiencing in real time through your job search.
So I don't need to finish the whole thing to
Nope.
start. I just need to take the first two modules, get things going, and then as I see
Exactly.
results, I can tap into the other modules.
Yep,
And
exactly.
folks, as we kind of wrap up, and everyone's been here for an hour, I really appreciate your time. Is nothing stops the clock. Starting a course like this gets you moving forward to where when you need these resources, they're available to you versus getting that pink slip and all of a sudden you're saying, you got to go find a job
Yes.
in 2 weeks. You're 2 weeks too late. So start now, plan your
Be
career,
proactive.
be proactive, build a career strategy, that roadmap right now. Where am I today? Where do I want to go in the next 3 years? And start getting there. And that makes all the difference in the world. Great.
Woohoo.
So Angie, thank you for your time
Thanks, Randy.
today. Very good resource for a lot of folks. It'll be on the replay on LinkedIn and several other social media platforms as well. So with that, everyone have a wonderful day, and
Yeah,
we'll talk to you soon.
this was fun. Thank you.